Awesome. So I'll share my screen here, and on our right one, is it easy? Oh, there it is. Let me close my desktop. Great. So on our main page here, you'll notice the syllabus is located here. I'm just going to go ahead and open up the syllabus and show you guys a few of the tools that we'll be working with at the start here. So if you noticed here for our first session, the only assessment we really had was the pretest, which most of us are done with already. And the other area over here is the introduction to the Photopea workspace. I'll be following along with these guidelines during our class as well. But essentially, there's a few ways you can go about doing the same thing in Photopea. So make sure that you are familiar with a few of them, just in case one way doesn't work or anything like that. I'm going to go ahead and type in photopea.com. And this will bring up the Photopea in your browser. So you'll become very familiar with this screen here. I use an ad blocker on my website, but Photopea does have ads that run on the side here. I actually disabled my ad blocker for Photopea because it supports them, but also they give you this pop-up every 5 seconds if you have it on, which is pretty frustrating to use. So I would say just disable it if you do have one for here. Otherwise, the ads will be over here on the right side. Now, I mentioned this in the chat, but if you go and hit a new project here, you'll see that a bunch of items pop up here. Now, on the top left side over here is the name of the project that you'll be using. So I'm just going to call this one tutorial, and that's what it's going to be saved as. And then you have the dimensions of the project as well. You can use pixels, percentages, or inches, or millimeters, whichever one you're comfortable with. If you're using screensavers and you use monitors a lot, you might be familiar with the pixels, like the 1920 by 1080. If you use a lot of, if you work in the office or anything, you might know all of the different sizes of paper. So in general, if I hit inches and I type in, what was it again? 8.5 by 11, I'll actually get the same size as my paper I have up here. Oh, my green screen's blocking it, sorry. But it's like a normal piece of paper that I'll be using. Underneath the IN, you'll see this arrows here, and that will pretty much swap your measurements whichever way you'd like. I'm going to go ahead and type in 1920 by 1080 pixels here. And the DPI is kind of the quality. You can keep that at 72. These aren't a big deal. But all I'm doing here is I'm just fiddling around with the settings and getting used to it. These are all templates, so there's various templates you can use. You'll also notice in the bottom left, you see a social, print, photos, screen, mobile, and ads. And all of these are just ways to kind of determine what you're working with. So if I hit social, you'll notice that there's a few FB or YouTube items here, or Twitter or Instagram. There's a bunch of stuff here that is the exact size that works perfectly for them. If you go to print, it will be the paper sizes and whatnot, and it's pretty much the same thing. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to click on these seagulls here, or pelican, I forgot which ones they were, and what this does is it brings up my overall Photopea area. So this is your workshop. You'll be very familiar with this area at the end of this class, and there's a lot of cool tools and ideas that are buried in here. And what I would say is that it might be overwhelming in a while, but just chip away at it bit by bit, and it will help out. The area that you might be the most drawn to is this right side over here called the Layers panel. Now, the Layers panel is probably where you're going to be doing most of your work. It's where we organize the layers of our project and make sure that it's working okay. Now, if you see here, if I click on a certain layer, it highlights it in my Layers panel. And if you see here, when I hit strip, it kind of gives me this blue outline, but for the other ones, it doesn't. Sometimes it gives you blue and sometimes it doesn't. If you see here, you have these eyeballs on the left side of these layers. If you click on these eyeballs, what it will do is hide whatever that layer is. So it won't delete the layer, but you can hide it and then unhide it to showcase what's going on inside of it. So if I want to hide my two text, I can hit these eyes, and you'll notice that my eyes are gone, or excuse me, the text is gone from my main center. If I want them back, I can click them again. I can get rid of strip. If you see here, strip seems to be kind of making it a bit more shadowy, so I can just hit that. And if I want to get rid of my background, I can hit this button too. Now, another thing that you can do is reorganize your layers. Let's see here. So a few of these layers can be shifted around. If I hold on the layer, you'll notice that if I move my mouse after I hold on it, you see how it kind of goes from a mouse cursor with a finger into this kind of square bracket. And what this means is that I can actually move this up and down throughout my layer pane. Now, what's the point of doing this? Well, let's just say that I wanted to put something in front of my background. I could go ahead and drag this guy down here, and you'll notice that it's gone from my main picture. But if I hit my eyeball in this background, you'll see that the image or the text is still there. It's kind of hard to see because of the gray background, but you'll notice that the text is still there. Let me drag down the I saw the sign, and you'll see that it's not white anymore, but these two text images are here. And if I click my eyeball on this background image, you'll see that the text is hidden. So essentially, without going too far into the layers pane is an area where you can hide and view layers, and you can drag around your layers to show which ones you want at the front. Now, the layers act in a top-down hierarchy, meaning that whatever is at the top of your layer pane is going to be above the things that are below it. So if you see here, my two text signs are above my background. If I drag my two text images below my background, what will happen? Well, the background will cover them up. If I hide my background, you'll see that I have my text there, but it's just simply hidden beneath the layers there. You can kind of think of this like a stack of pancakes almost, or a stack of plates. It's very hard to get to the ones underneath it without first dealing with the ones on top. So just keep that in mind while you're working on these projects there. Now, in our introduction here, there's not too much about layers, but I do just want you guys to get familiar with what these layers are and how to do them. Now, that's what layers are, and another item I want to show off is opening up something in Photopea. See here? If you navigate into our course folder inside of the content page, you'll notice that there's another folder called Folder for New Files Added by Instructor. There's a bunch of items in here with the PDFs. I need to actually change that one around, sorry. But if you click on session 1, you'll notice that I have a few images here. I'm just going to download the cows. You might be seeing a lot of cows in this class, sorry, but I usually rely on them just to use our Photopea, as it's pretty straightforward and visible the effects they have. So now what I did is I opened up Photopea and I downloaded my cows image. Now there's a lot of ways you can go about this. Some of you might be more familiar with using the navigation prompts and stuff than others. So, but for now I'm just going to assume that we're not too familiar with it. So there's a few ways you can actually open up your Photopeas, or excuse me, your images in Photopea. If you're on Google Chrome, you can go to the top right over here, click these three dots at the top right, and then go down to Downloads. Another way to get the downloads is a shortcut that says Control+J. So if I hit Control and J, or I click, oopsie-daisy, if I hit Control and J, or I click on that Downloads, it will bring me to this area with all the stuff I've downloaded, and you'll notice that the cows.jpg is at the top there. What I can do now is I can either hold and click on this, so you see I get the new dragging selection, hover over my Photopea to get to that tab, and then release it into my Photopea. Another way I can do this is, let me see here, I can also go to File and Open. I can go into my Downloads folder after I've opened it, and you'll see that my cows are in there. So I can hit Open to open up my cows. And now you'll see I get 2 cows PSD. Another way I can do it is by going to the desktop. What I can do is inside of my cows.jpg, I can drag this into my desktop. And then inside of Photopea, I can go ahead and drag it from the desktop over into my Photopea. After you have your cow image open, there's a few different things you could do here with our images. Of course, as the most notable one here is that we can hide and show our image. And there's a few other tools here. Of course, some of these tools are just kind of more implicit than others. if you see here at the very bottom of our left hand side tool area, which is where all our tools will be located, there's a magnifying glass. If you click on that magnifying glass, this will be our zoom tool. So if I click anywhere with the zoom tool, of course it will zoom into my image. If you right click, you'll notice that you'll get a few more areas. You have a zoom in, you have a zoom out, and you also have a fit the area as well. Now I'm just showing off some tools here that might be useful for some of the projects, even if they're not used in the project directly. But this tool is nice to kind of get to areas that might be hard to get to in other situations. The quality is a little off here. I apologize for that. Sometimes that happens. Usually working with lossless quality is a bit better, which is something we'll get to later. Again, I mentioned this a bit earlier, but on the left side over here, where you have all these items, is your tool area or your workplace area. You're going to have the ability to click on pretty much all of these, and if you hover over them, you'll notice that it tells you what the tool is. So this one is called the Move tool, and if you also notice, after it says Move tool, you have a parentheses with a letter inside of it. Now, of course, some of you might not know what it is, but what this is a shortcut tool. So this letter that's after the name of the tool correlates with the shortcut key for that tool. So if I press V on my keyboard, you'll notice that I get back to my normal state. What is my zoom tool? Well, there's a Z on my zoom tool. So if I press Z on my keyboard, you'll notice that it brings up my zoom tool again. And I can click around anywhere I'd like. And I can right click. And this brings up, it's called a context menu or an action menu. There's a few different ways to go about it. But it brings up a list of options you can select in order to figure out what you'd like to do with your image. All of your tools have a right click ability on them, or the majority of them do, so just fiddle around with that as well. There are a few questions on quizzes in the future that are sometimes a bit more straightforward, like what is the shortcut key for this tool? Being able to hover over the tool and look at it is always helpful and will help with those types of questions as well. Now there's a bunch of different tools down here, and some of them are a bit more complex than others, so I don't want to delve too far into any of them. So what I might do is, whichever ones I do go over, I'll go over briefly, just to show off what they're doing, and then of course on your end, you can fiddle around with them as well. There's some that are pretty straightforward I'd like to cover first. The giant T that's underneath this magnifying glass here, or excuse me, this dodge tool up here, if you click on it, you'll notice that it brings up a few new items here at the top. When I had my zoom tool selected, there wasn't that much up there. If I hit my T, it brings up more items here. If I click on my Photoshop anywhere, you'll notice that it just brings in text that I can type into. If I want to select this text, and I want to have it in my image, what I can do is after I type, I can hit this check mark that's at the top up here. Your projects delve deeply into text and using those tools later on, so I won't cover them too much now, but just know that there's a way to add in text to your area. And if you noticed very quickly, when I added in my text, what did you see on the right side? Well, it brought in a new layer that I can then go ahead and hide and show as I'd like. Now, a few more of these tools are a bit more complex, as I said earlier. There's another tool here that's a bit more straightforward, and it has the rectangle that's two above the zoom tool at the bottom. So if you go up one and up one more, you'll notice this rectangle. If I select the rectangle, or if I use the shortcut U, which is after the word rectangle, I get this cross, and I can go ahead and drag this cross anywhere I'd like, and you'll notice that it gives me measurements. Well, what does this tool do? Well, if I deselect or I release my key, it actually just makes a really big red square in my screen. This is kind of hurting my eyes, so what I might do is go back to my history up here, and you'll notice that there's a way I can undo actions. So above your layers, again, you might be familiar with this or not, there's an item up here called history. And your history includes every single thing that you've done so far in your project. So let's say that you're working on your project and you add in a big red square like this and you really don't like it. There's a few ways you can go about it. you can go into edits and undo, and that will get rid of it for us, or we can delete it as well. But you'll notice a cool thing about the history is that it also saves changes you've undone. So this history is a really good way to try and experiment with other ways and then go back to what you liked before. And let's just say that I kind of liked the way the rectangle looked. I can go up to my history here and I can select that rectangle again and it'll bring it back. If I don't like how it looks, I can select the open or the type tool to add back into text, or the rectangle to add back into rectangle. So the history is just that. It's the history of everything you've done. And another way you can do your history is if you go to edit, you can go to step forward, which step forwards in your history, or you can go to step backwards, which is like the undo. So this is kind of your undo and redo. You might be familiar with those. And that can be located in your edit at the top 3 or inside of this history here. Now, to the left of your history, you'll notice that there's a few kind of singular characters here, like ACT, PRO, and INF. Those are all used in later on projects, actually in DM141. So for right now, we might look at them a little bit, but just know for right now that these tool things over here might not come up too often, but just know that don't get rid of them or anything like that. It's helpful to figure out what they're doing. Now you'll notice at the top of all of these areas here, or these kind of menus that are in our Photoshop, you see these 2 arrows that are kind of opposite to each other. They're pointing out. If you go ahead and click on those arrows, it actually expands the type of toolkit that you're working with. So if you notice, this guy's expanded. If I close him, it brings him back to that one. And I can do it with this one over here as well. I can close the history. So now I have his layers and all that. But it's a bit more hidden than it used to be. I usually work with the history open just so I can see my layers. But if you'd like to focus on your project fully, you can do that. You can also click it over here. It doesn't do too much over here though, because the tools are kind of built in. Now, let's just say that you somehow managed to get rid of one of your layers here. Let's see here if I can do that. So sometimes it randomly happens where you're messing around and you're hitting your key shortcuts and you accidentally remove one of your window panes or something like that. So you can't see the history of the layers. To fix this, what you can do is go into the window view up here, and you can simply look at everything that you would like to see here. If you notice, when I hit window, I have a layers pane. If I hit layers, it brings back my layers that I can work with again. Of course, I can always open this back up to get to where I was before. But in general, if you feel that you're missing 1 or 2 windows, you can go to window and try to match up with what it was. But for now, I would say that this usually doesn't happen too often, but just be aware that that might occur, that you might hit a shortcut that kind of removes windows or something. Cool. So, with our images that we're working with, there's a few things we could do in Photopea that are pretty straightforward and easy to do right away. One of them that is always kind of straightforward is using the black and white type of filter, right? So whenever we upload our cow image or any type of images that we're practicing with, you'll notice that in my layers pane, I only have the 1 layer. What I can do with this layer after I have it selected is I can go up to my image up at the top left here, and I can go into my adjustments. Inside of adjustments, you'll see a bunch of stuff that might be looking a little crazy at the start, but all of these are ways that you can kind of change or adjust the type of image that you have. Now, I mentioned earlier the black and white filter, and if you notice here inside of our adjustments, there's one just like that for black and white. If I hit black and white, you'll see that I get a new menu, and these are referred to in your book and in your lectures as context menus. They're pretty much just an extra menu that give context to what you're doing. Excuse me. And after you have this layer, you'll see that we get a bunch of options here. So you can colorize it. You can decrease the redness of the black and white image. You can increase the green. There's a lot of green in my image, so the more green I increase, the more white it gets. If I decrease my green, you'll see how it gets darker. stuff like that. And this is always fun to just fiddle around with. This is how I kind of got started in Photoshop and Photopea, is just messing around with images and stuff like that. Of course, having guideline projects is always helpful, but this is one way you can figure out the adjustments. Now, let's just say that I did all this and I hate how it turned out. I think this looks pretty bad as a black and white image. What you can do is hit this reset button, and that will reset it to your previous type of filter that was there. After you're okay with getting black and white, you can hit OK. And you'll notice now that my image is black and white, and it's kind of permanently black and white. If you see here, I can't really remove the black and white. But where do you see the black and white pop up? Well, it's inside of my history up here. So let's just say that I'm working for a client and they all of a sudden don't want a black and white image. What I can do is just hit open again, and it removes that black and white filter. Now, if I want to try out a different type of adjustment, I can go back to my image. I can go to adjustments, and there's a bunch of them here. Lots of them with the terminology sometimes get a bit confusing, but a cool one is called color balance. And color balance uses the RGB, or red, green, blue, to kind of manipulate your image. So if I increase the green of the color balance, does everyone see how much more green it gets there? So it just increases the green. And this is a very neat way to kind of trick your images to maybe being a bit more green or lush or anything like that. If you sometimes see pictures of like countries that are like, how is it so green over there? Sometimes they might adjust the green in it as well. But any way that you do this, yeah, yeah, that's why it's so green over there. Yeah, right. It's a very neat way. They might be green. I don't want to slander any country, but yeah, sometimes some of the images are pretty green. If you have a very nice ocean image, you can increase the blue of it as well. There's a bunch of stuff you could do here. And again, if you don't like the way it turned out, you can reset it. Up at the range here, you'll see a few options here like midtones or highlights. For right now, I would keep it on shadows, and we can fiddle around with those later. But a cool way to do it is you can also see what each of these do to it. So let me get 100 green. And if you can see here, you can kind of manipulate each area of it as well. Don't worry too much about doing all the range and stuff like that. It's more so just figuring out what all of these do here. And again, if I don't like my color balance, if I want to make it more green or less green or anything, I can hit open, and then I'm back to my original image. And for argument's sake, I might add in the hue and saturation here. And I might make my image a bit more saturated. If you see here, that grass looks really green. And I might decrease the hue. That changes around the color as well. These cows are at like a rave or something, like a party. But there's lots of different things you could do with these as well. Excuse me. So those are your kind of adjustments that you might be doing. One of your projects might ask you to make it black and white, and that's one way you can make it black and white. But I would say image adjustments, and you can fiddle around with all of these as well. Now, let's just say that I'm working on my project here, and I kind of want to make it a bit longer. Maybe I want to extend it to the right a bit more for whatever sake. Let's just say that I have quite a bit of space on the right here. I can go into image, and then I can hit these two options down here that are called canvas size and image size. Now, of course, with what I'm working with, I have 695 by 352 pixels. So if I want to extend to the right more, I can increase my width, because my width is what goes across, right? So I can hit maybe, let me try 720. And if you notice, the width of it going across extends on both edges there. So I can also go to image, because you see here, I kind of have this white background, white and gray. Now, I might have assumed this at the start, but if you notice, this white and gray background is what we call transparency. And what that means is that it's white and gray, and if you ever use this image, it's going to be blank in the background. So you can kind of see through the image, and that's very helpful for logos or other type of products like that. For our purpose here, we don't really want a lot of transparency, so I'm going to go into image and image size. Whoopsie-daisy, excuse me. Image and canvas size. Oh, sorry, I'm mistaking myself here. If I want to extend my image to kind of fit this new transparency here, I can go into the edit up here, and then free transform. And you'll notice that what happens here is I get a few squares around my image. So I kind of hiccup there 1 second. I'll do it one more time. So I increased my image and canvas size to 720, and it made some edges that are transparent. If I want to make my image fit into those edges, I can go to Edit, Free Transform, and I can simply drag around these images here to fit it there. Now, if you notice, what might be one downside of doing this? Well, if I stretch it out far, it looks pretty bad, right? Sometimes free transform works okay. Like if you notice, this doesn't have a huge difference between the other one. But other times it might be noticeable if you're using it. So I would say for this situation, it's fine. But sometimes it doesn't work out as well. After I've done this free transform, I can hit this check mark at the top, and that will save my changes. And again, the good thing about the history is that it saves everything you do, right? So if I don't like how I did my free transform, I can just simply keep stepping back until I'm at my original image. Like so. The only downside of using the history is that let's just say that I don't like how I did the hue and saturation, but I did like my new image size, is that my hue and saturation are in my history. So sometimes you would have to kind of be careful or maybe redo your steps back to that point in order to avoid doing it again. Cool. Now, I know that there was a few people in a few of my previous classes that had mouses or mice that didn't have a right click that worked, or maybe their computer for whatever reason wasn't working up to speed. If you notice in a few of these tools that we're working with, particularly the rectangle tool that I showed earlier, you get this kind of menu up here at the top that has a bunch of options. This tool is a bit straightforward. Again, it's a rectangle. If I drag it out, it's red. I'm going to go to Edit and Undo. And what I'm going to do is, instead of doing the bright red, I'm going to click on the Fill option up here. And then I might select gray or something. Gray is a bit easier to use. Excuse me. So with the gray, I can drag across the gray. And now I have this nice gray square that I'm working with. Now, if you remember, when I used my zoom tool and I right-clicked, I got all of these options up here. When I'm using my gray tool here to draw gray squares, if I right-click, nothing happens too much there. You get the make selection here, and we'll talk about selection tools later on. But for now, some of the tools have more options to do and some don't. There's a little thing that I wanted to show off here, and it's this kind of arrow that's kind of hard to see. So let me zoom in a little bit here. Is it not going to let me zoom in? Oh, good. It might be hard to see from here, but if you look at my rectangular tool, if you notice, there's a little arrow that's pointing down to the bottom right corner. Now, what is the point of this little white arrow that's pointing down to the corner? Well, if you click on it, see here, is it not clicking there? Oh, sorry. If you right click on that one, sometimes clicking on it brings it up as well. It did it there for me. But if you right click or click on this arrow, you'll get a bunch of more options here. And this is another idea of the context menu. It's usually set onto the rectangle, but there's tools embedded inside of other tools. So some tools have different functionality that work for different situations. So for our purposes, they might be changed based on that. We might use the rectangle tool to make a logo, but we might use the ellipse tool to make a logo as well. So what I can do is I can right click on my rectangle. I can hit the ellipse tool. And then I can drag this out, and you'll notice that now I have an ellipse instead of a rectangle. Now, if you notice, I'm kind of changing the image that's inside of this tool here, but I'm not clicking on it or anything. So how am I doing that? Well, if you notice, the rectangle tool's hotkey is U, right? The letter U. So if I click U while I'm not selecting anything, it actually cycles through the types of tools that I have inside of that area. So if at any point your computer is stuck or your mouse isn't working, what you could do is find the hotkey of that tool. Let's just say for the brush tool, which is B. I can hit B again, and it actually cycles through all of the tools that I have here. So that's a little neat trick. But just remember that for most of these tools, there's also sub-tools, as I like to call them, or tools within tools, that are kind of different for each situation. I can draw lines as well, and stuff like that. This is starting to look like an abstract art piece, so I'm just going to go ahead and go back to the start of this, where I have everything kind of the same again. You can keep whichever way that you've been fiddling around with it as well, just so that you're a bit familiar with the tools. Now, let's see here. With our brush tool, which is the one that you might all be most familiar with. I remember when I first start off in these guys, I usually kind of fiddle around with the brush tool. The brush tool is a bit further down, and its hotkey is B. So if you press B on your keyboard, it will bring up the brush tool. And you'll notice that the brush tool, what it does is it acts like a painting brush pretty much. So I can paint over anything I'd like. Right now, you'll notice that it's a bit tough on the eyes though, right? So what you can do with the brush tool is there's a few ways you can go about this. If you'll notice on the right side over here, you have something called BRU, which stands for your brush. And this menu, BRU, brings up a real-time menu of what your brush looks like. So I can increase the size of my brush, and if you notice how big it's getting on my screen, I kind of like the 15 pixels, which is pretty good. I can also increase the angle that my brush is at. Because I'm not using a fancy brush, the angle doesn't work. But you can increase the roundness to make it very thin, or decrease the roundness to make it thin. And I can then change the angle of my roundness as well. So this kind of makes a type of cool kind of like line that I'm working with. And you can also increase the spacing of your tool if you'd like it there. If you notice now, I kind of have like these steps that are going on. And if you want to increase the roundness, you can as well. So now I have kind of polka dots going around my screen here. Now that's kind of the in-depth brush tool. And if you notice, there's a bunch of different items up here as well. These items at the top change the type of tip of your brush that you're using. So you can use a type of brush that uses a kind of like shadowy tip there. You can use one that kind of looks like fingerprints almost. I think this one does. Let me increase the size. Yeah. So some of these look like smudges and stuff and whatnot too. You could do some really cool designs with the brush tool for sure. This one kind of looks like you're drawing over it with your own little tool. So there's definitely a bunch of different ways to go about it. If you remembered when I was using the zoom tool, I right click to bring up some more options to work with. The same is used with the brush tool. So if you right click with the brush tool, you'll see that it brings up the same menu that's inside of the BRU over here. It is missing a few things because this is a quick context menu, but this menu should help you in a pinch. Excuse me. If you're kind of working with this tool as you go along and you right click, you can definitely change a few of the options that you're working with. You can make some goofy photos, or you can also use this tool to kind of help illustrate a few extra items here. If you notice, if I decrease the hardness to 0 and I make it a full amount of pixels, I can kind of make this a bit more shadowy if I paint along the very dark edge. You see there? Oh yeah, question? Oh, when I'm sorry, I'm doing the so the shortcut that I'm using here is the step backward, and that's Control plus Z. I'm sorry, I'm so used to doing it. Yeah, so I'm always using Control Z here on my keyboard. So yeah, that's a great point. Thank you for bringing it up. When I'm drawing with my tool, if I don't like what I did, I can press Control and Z on my keyboard, and it wipes it all away. I hit my history pane, but if I draw out my brush tool, I can also just hit open again, and it will undo the brush for me. Sorry about that. I was so used to doing it. Edit and step backward is another way to do it. And if you see here in the step backward, the shortcut is Control plus Z. Now, there's another one called step forward, which is to redo. So let's just say that I liked how that looked. I can press Control Shift and Z, and that will reapply my change. Or I can go to the history, hit brush tool, or edit and step forward. I know I'm kind of throwing a lot at you guys at once right now, but a reoccurring theme that I find in this class that's kind of confusing for some students is the kind of different ways you can go about doing these tools. So if you saw right there, I showed you 3 different ways you can go about undoing an action. And that's kind of the same for a lot of different tools. So there's a lot of different ways you can go about achieving the same result. What I want to say about that is that there's no one better way to achieve the result than the other. As long as you get the result is fine for me. Some ways are easier than others, so make sure you take that into account. But don't fret out about trying to find out or remember every single way to do the action. Just remember that we're all, we're all here to try and figure out to get to the end product. Sorry about that. Sorry, there's someone in the waiting room there. Okay. Awesome. So, to continue forward with a few of these lessons here. Let's see here. With this brush tool, I'm going to go ahead and reset it back to my normal tool. I right-click to bring up my context menu, and I'm going to set it at 40. And then I'll set the hardness at maybe 27 just so it looks a bit better. Now, you might be wondering, okay, well, how do I change my color for this brush tool? One way we can go about changing the color of the brush tool is at these 2 options down here. So if you look at the bottom left below your zoom tool on the left side here, you'll have a black and a white box. If I hit the black box, you'll notice that it brings up, or if I select the black box, it will bring up this tool set option that contains a color picker. So you can change the type of colors you like. There's preset ones, but you can also type in the hex color that you like as well, in case you wanted to change it around to be a different color. And you can also kind of drag around your color picker tool in order to figure out which color that you like as well. There's a bunch of different ways you can do about it. I like this color a lot, so I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And now you'll notice that when I'm drawing, I have my new color picked. You'll notice here as well that there's a second option beneath your blue, which is this white color. And this is really handy because you can change this color to be whatever you want. Maybe I kind of like a purple hue for it. But if you notice when I'm drawing, I didn't get to pick the purple color. So, hi Baron, welcome. So if I don't have access to the second color, how do I get it? Well, this is kind of hard to see on my screen, but if you look beneath these 2 color squares, there's 2 right angles, and they have 2 arrows pointing to each other. If you click that, it will swap those 2 colors for you, and then when you draw, it will actually draw in purple. And that will be that for that one. And now there's one more thing here. If you notice, you have the black and white at the top right of your colors. And if you select those, it will reset your options to the original one. Now, unfortunately, if you notice here, if I do edit, step backward, or undo, it won't give me back my original colors. So make sure that you only want to use the default colors when you're done using them, in case you miss them. Or you can simply save it as well into your hex values. Awesome. So, one more thing that I'll talk about before our break starts up here is the sampling tool, which is something that everyone might be familiar with when they're using some art tools. So if we go ahead and let me see here. It's been a while. Where was it? There it is. Awesome. Sorry about that, everyone. I forgot where that was located. So if you see here on the left side, you have a bunch of tools, and your 6th tool down from the very top is called the eyedropper tool, or the sample tool, as it's called as well. Let me reset these colors. Now, if I select this sample tool, you'll notice that nothing changes right away. But what I do get is a type of tool that will take the color of whatever I select on my photo. So let's just say that I really like this kind of green hedge that's in my photo. I can click on that green hedge, and if you notice at the bottom, what did my black change into? It changed into the type of green. So now if I hit my brush tool and I draw, I actually, of course, it's going to look a bit different because it's not texturized like the brush, but you'll notice that it's pretty much the same color. I can go ahead and swap these two colors and do the same for my grass that's at the front. And you'll notice where I click gives me a different shade. So let me get a brighter shade near the front. I can select my brush tool again, and then I can go ahead and change the size and the reduce the hardness of it maybe. And maybe I'll make it into one of these kind of sketching tools that are down here. I'm just kind of randomly throwing these around. But if you notice when I paint with the brush tool now, with these guys selected, you'll notice that I can kind of paint it into the grass here. I can maybe cover up some stuff or whatever it is that I'm doing. Of course, it looks a bit wonky. The brush tool is very useful for like very small, sometimes touch-ups. But sometimes there's other tools for the job as well. But it's always helpful to know that the tool is out there that you can use like this. And again, the way that I got these colors to sample for my brush tool is by selecting this eyedropper tool. And then going ahead and selecting around some of these items here. Let me see here. Awesome. So now I've been talking quite a bit about undoing actions and stuff as well, and adding in tools and adding in rectangles. And I hope you're kind of familiar with the layout of this. So on your left side will be your tools. On the right side will be your history and layers. And these you can increase or decrease as you see fit. If you're ever missing a layer or a pane that you need, go to Window and see if you can find it in there. You can always fiddle around with the window, but of course ask me for help with that because I can troubleshoot it as well. Another thing here that I'd like to show off before we leave for our first break is kind of saving these files and what to save them as. Let me add in back in a rectangle really quick just so that I make sure that this looks a bit different than the other ones. Where's my rectangle tool? There it is. And I'm going ahead and just going to draw a rectangle up here. And then I'm going to click U, maybe get an ellipse over here, something small. And then I'm going to get my brush tool. And then I'm just going to paint in using some of the brush here. Whoopsie-daisy. To paint it in. Now, here's something that I wanted to show off too subsequently. If you notice here, I added in my two shapes. And when I'm trying to paint on this background layer, it's not working for me. My brush tool isn't working for some reason. It's giving me an error that says layer is not editable. Now this doesn't make sense because earlier we saw that we drew on the cows using the colors that we selected from the image. So what changed since then? Well, if you notice, if I look at my layers pane, I have 3 layers now instead of the original one that I had, the background. When I got 2 more layers is when I added in 2 more shapes using the shape tool, the rectangle tool. So if you see here, I'm going to add in a rectangle. And if you look at the layers pane on the right side, you'll notice that it becomes shape 3. So how do I fix this issue of these shapes not being editable? Well, if you see here, my shape 2 is highlighted in dark gray, which tells me that that's the current layer that I'm on. So whichever edits I'm doing is going to be to that layer. If I want to go ahead and change the layer that I'm editing, I can simply click on the titles of the other layers here. After I've clicked on these layers here, I'm going to click on my background layer. I go ahead, and if you see now, I can start drawing again like this. This does look a little wonky. I was never the best at art, so please excuse me for that. But in general, I just wanted to show off what some of the issues you might run into and ways to approach and fix them. So now I have a little bit of edits here done. And if you notice, I kind of don't like how my shape 1 looks in this area. So what I can do is I can go up to the very top and use this move tool or the V tool. Move tool is kind of your basic tool. And what it is whichever layer that you're currently on, it will move that layer. So I can select my move tool. I can select my shape 1. So daisy. And I can go ahead and drag around this shape into any area I'd like. Now let's just say that this shape is a bit too big for me. I can go to Edit, and then free transform. And then I can go ahead and drag and reduce or increase the shape to whichever size I want. If you notice, if you hover on the outside edges of your shape, you get this type of arrow that's curved. And what that means is that when you use it to shift around, it will actually twist it like that for us. So that's one way we can go ahead and use this tool to make our own shapes different. You can close this down, and I'm just going to simply put this at the right side. And now here's a little trick that's sometimes unfamiliar to new people in Photopea, is if you see here, I'm going to make my move tool, and I want to move this ellipse to the bottom left side of my screen here. So I selected my move tool. I'm going to hit my ellipse, and I'm going to drag it all the ways over here. And if you've noticed here, even though my ellipse tool wasn't selected at the start, or excuse me, even though my ellipse shape 2 wasn't selected, when I selected it with my move tool, I can move it, and if I let go, my shape 2 is now selected. So cool, I'm going to move that over there. And now, if you wanted to go ahead and rename some of these for your own sake to kind of remember stuff, what you can do is look at the layer, select it, and then in the title of that layer, you can double click. And this will bring up a little menu that you can use to rename it. So I'm just going to call this one cows. I'm going to call shape 1 rectangle, and then shape 2 circle. I'm just showing off, you don't need to do this per se, but I'm just showing off ways that you can change your name. You can call them whatever you'd like. But this is just one way you can go ahead and edit this image. So cool. I went ahead and I did a lot of editing to this image, even though we didn't do that much yet, but this is a pretty solid way to show off Photopea and their tools. And you can see here again that these tools are a bit in depth, but chipping away at them is always useful to get the hang of them. Now, if I wanted to go ahead and finish using this image and maybe upload it somewhere, I can go into my file and I can go to this option here that says save as PSD. Now, a PSD is pretty much the type of file that we'll be working with a lot in Photoshop and Photopea, and that's a Photoshop specific file. So there's a lot of different ways that we can use it, and I'll show off why we would want to use that as opposed to maybe a JPEG or a PNG, whatever else we're used to. So I'm going to hit save as a PSD, and you'll notice that in my downloads down here, I get something that says cows.psd. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and drag my cows.psd over here, and you'll notice that my cows image is already out here, but it's different from my cows.psd. I'm just going to delete my cows.psd because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to File, Export As, and you'll notice we get a bunch of options here. So some of these you might be more familiar with than others. I'm going to hit PNG just because that's the highest quality. You can then reduce the quality of your image, whichever one you'd like to use. I usually keep it at 100, but this will change the amount of space that it takes up. You could definitely get away with less quality sometimes. As you can see, there's not a huge noticeable difference between 20%, even 15%, and 100%. But I'm just going to leave it at 100 for right now. I'm going to hit save. And now you'll notice that I have two images here that are called cows and cows.psd. And if you notice in my cows image, when I open it up, I get my ellipse and then my brush angles at the side. So you might be wondering, the main question is, why would I want to save it as a PSD as opposed to this one and whatnot? Well, I'll show you why, is because when we're editing these, it's very important to differentiate between the two. So first of all, let's just say that in one of my images, let's just say the client for some reason wanted this image and they don't like how this rectangle looks. So they want the rectangle out of the image and they want the ellipse up there for it. If I go ahead and open up my cows.psd, you'll notice here that I only have a single layer. Let me grab one more thing here. So you'll notice here, sorry about that I only have a layer, and I'm kind of thinking, how am I going to go ahead and remove this rectangle and this ellipse from this image? If I select this image, does everyone see how it's a singular image? If I try to maybe erase the image, let me see here if I have the erasing tool. The eraser tool E, which is located here, I can select that. What if I want to get rid of this square? Well, I got rid of the square, but you'll notice that the client still wants the background of the flowers and the grass in there. So how do I go about fixing this? Well, what if I go ahead and open up my PSD? So I have my cows.psd. If I open up this, what does everyone notice immediately about the differences here? Well, they look the same, but do you see the layers pane? The layers actually contain the same layers I was working on already. So now I have my rectangle layer, and what can I do to solve this client's issue? Well, I can hit the eyeball, and then I can just move this up here. So as you can see, that's much easier than trying to fiddle around with this one here, right? Trying to erase it, reapply some stuff, and items like that. So please make sure that you save everything as a PSD, because a PSD maintains all of the layers that you've been working with and the image adjustments that you've used. If you ever save something as a JPEG, like I did here, this JPEG file, it will maintain it only as a single image, and you won't be able to mess around with the layers like I am here. So essentially, the differences between your JPEG and PNG and your PSD file is that I can send all of you this cows.psd file, and every single one of you will have access to the circle, rectangle, and cows image there.